What's going on? Welcome to my video today. Today I'm going to be talking about evidence for God's existence and why so many people reject it and say that there's no evidence for God's existence. People rejecting God is not based on science or scientific discoveries. It is based on philosophical views. It's based on assumptions and presuppositions and a priori beliefs. So let me give you the definition of naturalism. The philosophical belief that everything arises from natural properties and causes, and supernatural or spiritual explanations are excluded or discounted. Notice that it said philosophical belief. Now let's look at the definition of methodological naturalism. It's a philosophical approach that assumes natural causes, explains all events and phenomena, and not supernatural ones. It's the basis for scientific investigations. The key points are, it's a rule that science should be neutral to God. It doesn't rule out intelligence as a causal factor, but it does rule out divine intelligence. And it requires scientists to look for empirical evidence and natural explanations. So this is the whole basis of why people reject God and evidence for God. Is because they hold to a philosophical view. This is not based on science or scientific discoveries, but they have this philosophical view before they ever study and observe the universe. Before they ever look at the universe and study it, right from the very beginning, they rule out the possibility of God as an explanation for the cause of the universe. They say that it's, quote, unscientific, quote, pseudoscience. They laugh, they mock, they scoff any idea of somebody mentioning intelligent design. They say that you can't do that when you do science. And so they have this philosophical view of methodological naturalism, and they rule out the possibility of God from the very beginning, and they must only look for natural causes because that is scientific. And then they study the universe, and then they say that there's no evidence for God. There's no evidence for God's existence. Does anybody else see the problem with this? You don't have to be a genius to see the problem with this. This is circular reasoning. They rule out God a priori from their philosophical assumptions about the universe. They rule out the possibility of God as a cause for the universe. And then they say that there's no evidence for God's existence because they interpret everything based on their naturalistic worldview. That's why people reject God. It's not that science has disproven God or that scientific discoveries in the last 100 or 200 years has ruled out God. Actually, on the contrary, scientific discoveries in the last 100 years have just even strengthened a creator. So, the universe appears to be designed. Here's Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist and advocate of evolution. He says, quote, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA, he says, quote, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved, unquote. Paul Davies, the agnostic physicist, says, quote, everyone agrees that the universe looks as if it were designed for life, unquote. So you got these atheist scientists that admit the universe looks like it was designed. So my question is, if it looks like it was designed, why would you think it's not designed? And the reason they think it's not designed is because they hold to naturalism or methodological naturalism. And they must never accept God as a hypothesis under any circumstances. Here's a quote Now, I want you to listen to this. This is very important right here. This quote right here. It's by a guy named Richard Lewontin from Harvard. He says, quote, "Our willingness to accept the scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment to materialism. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." So he admits, even when it's against common sense and intuition, and it makes absolutely no sense at all, that they have a commitment to materialism, and under no circumstances can they ever allow for a divine foot in the door, for a supernatural explanation of things. They rule out the possibility of God from the very beginning, and they interpret all the evidence based on the lens that they're looking through of naturalism, and then they say that there's no evidence for God. People reject God because of their philosophical assumptions, not because of scientific discoveries. People talk about science and God like that they're contrary to one another. They're not, and I'm going to show you that they're not. First, here's an example of how people say that there's science, that there's scientific, and they follow the evidence where it leads, but they admit that they don't. They admit. So Richard Dawkins was asked in an interview, what evidence would convince him that God existed? And he said he couldn't think of any. He said that if he heard God speak to him audibly, he would think he was hallucinating. He said if there was a message in the stars for him, he still wouldn't believe it because it could be powerful aliens who were trying to trick him. And the guy who was interviewing him, Peter Boghossian, agreed with him. Another famous atheist scientist, Peter Atkins, said that if there was a scientific formula in the Bible, that he would believe the Bible and believe in God if there were some kind of modern scientific formula in the Bible. But then he admitted that he would just think it was a forgery. He said that if he saw a message in the stars that said, "Peter, please believe in me," he said he would chalk it up to madness, that he had gone mad. He said that if he was to witness the risen Jesus Christ, he would just think he was hallucinating. And he admits there is no amount of evidence that would convince him. Here's something interesting, that if an atheist does say, if they give out this criteria of what would convince them that God existed, then you could say, well, isn't that a God of the gaps? You say that if you've seen, God spell out your name in the stars and say, "Believe in me," and then that would be sufficient evidence to believe in God. But isn't that a God of the gaps? I mean, couldn't there be another cause that we just don't know, that we can't explain? Maybe it's chance. Maybe the stars just happen to line up. I mean, isn't it possible that happened by chance? Is it possible that aliens did it and we're just trying to trick you? I mean, surely there's got to be any natural explanation is better than a supernatural one, right? Isn't that a God of the gaps argument? Because you don't know who did it, therefore you assume that God did it? I mean, that's what they say to us, right? So they make like we have to choose between science and God. That we have to choose between one or the other. And that's absolutely ridiculous. It's like having to choose between engineering and Henry Ford for the cause of the Ford engine. just because we understand how the universe, what is science? All science is us observing and studying the universe to understand the mechanisms of how it works. That's all science is. Science is not an entity. Science does not have a mind. Science is not a thing. Science is just a methodology that we use to study the universe. So when we use science and we study the universe, why do you think that just because we understand how the universe works, that rules out an intelligent designer or creator? That's like saying because you understand how a Ford engine works or a Ford car, how it works, that proves that Henry Ford doesn't exist. If the universe is a random accident, completely unguided, why would you expect the universe to make sense? Albert Einstein said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. Why do you think we started doing science back centuries and centuries ago? Because we believe that it was created by a mind and that it has order and design and everything works together. Why would you think that anything would make any sense if it wasn't designed? And the God of the gaps argument, which is such a bad argument. Like they use lightning. They say that, okay, so we didn't used to understand things about nature, so we assumed that God did it. Now we're discovering things and that they have a natural cause, so therefore God is slowly disappearing. That is such a ridiculous argument. Like lightning, for example. They say that people used to believe that lightning was God. The gods were angry with us. And so we discovered that lightning has, a purpose and that has natural causes or whatever. But we're not arguing that God causes lightning and then it has no purpose and that it's lightning because he's angry. Who said that? Because some people were superstitious hundreds of years ago and they didn't understand anything about the laws of nature? We're saying that lightning exists because it has a purpose. It maintains the Earth's electrical balance. It produces nitrates, which fertilizes plants. It helps clean the atmosphere. It produces ozone. It purifies the air and removes pollutants like dust and pollen. Lightning has a purpose. And so we believe that an intelligent mind like God created lightning because it has a purpose. It's not a God of the gaps argument because we understand the purpose of lightning. All that is showing is that it has a purpose. And therefore, it appears to be designed. So people act like scientific discoveries in the 20th century has contradicted God or has disproved God. So on the contrary, people used to think the universe was eternal. What did we discover in the 20th century? That the universe had a beginning. And the cosmological argument says whatever begins to exist must have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Like I said, people used to think the universe was eternal, therefore it didn't need a cause to explain it. But we found out that it does have a beginning. And that all that you see, this earth, everything you see when you go outside, this used to not be here. And science confirms that. How did it get here? Nothing can be the cause of itself. You can't say science done it or the laws of nature caused all this to pop into existence. Because nature did not exist. The laws of nature did not exist. Time, space, and matter did not exist. Even atheist physicists will tell you this. Time, space, and matter had a beginning, and all of nature had a beginning. So whatever caused it cannot be nature. It has to be outside of nature. It has to be outside of time, space, and matter. It points to God. The laws of thermodynamics, the first and second law of thermodynamics points to a creator. The first law of thermodynamics states that matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So that seems to suggest that energy and matter, or mass, it's easier just to say matter, that it could not have had a naturalistic beginning because it cannot be created. Energy can only be transferred from one form to another. It cannot be naturally created. But the universe says that time, space, and matter had a beginning. The second law of thermodynamics seems to show that energy and matter could not have been eternal anyway, because the universe is running out of energy. The sun is running out of energy. Every time energy is transferred into a different form, it loses a little bit of energy as heat. And it slowly losing that energy as heat, and it can never gain it back. So the universe cannot be eternal, or it would have already ran out of energy already. So matter and energy cannot be created because of the first law of thermodynamics. And then it wasn't eternal because of the second law of thermodynamics. That must mean it had a cause that is not natural. Also, science is the law of biogenesis that states that life only comes from life. Life cannot come from non-life. To say that abiogenesis happened, that life came from non-life, is to go against science. Science supports a creator. It does not support naturalistic origins. So let's look at other discoveries that point to God. The fine-tuning argument. This is a quote by Stephen Hawking. It says, quote, "If the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, it would have recollapsed before it reached its present size. On the other hand, if it had been greater by a part in 1,000,000, the universe would have expanded too rapidly for stars and planets to form." There's many constants in nature that is precisely fine-tuned that we have discovered. They're balanced on a razor's edge, and they are very, very precisely fine-tuned. That if they would increase or decrease in just a tiny, tiny fraction, that the universe could not exist or life could not exist. The strength of gravity. There's 4 forces, fundamental forces of nature. Gravity, the strong and weak nuclear force, electromagnetism. Okay, so gravity. If the gravitational force is fine-tuned, the gravitational force is fine-tuned in 1 part to 10 to the 40th power. If that changed in either direction, we wouldn't be here. Now, let me give you an example. When you're using exponents, the number of known atoms in the entire universe, the atoms of everything in the universe, is 1 in 10 to the 80th power. Exponents, when you add all these zeros, this number is a lot bigger than you think. It's a lot bigger than your brain can comprehend. All the known atoms in the entire universe is 1 in 10 to the 80th power. Gravity is tuned in 1 in 10 part to the 40th power. If you were to move that in either direction, increase it or decrease the strength of it, we wouldn't be here. The odds of getting a royal flush in poker, the odds of getting a royal flush is 1 in 650,000. So every 650,000 hands you get dealt, you got a chance of getting a royal flush 1 time. The odds of 2 royal flushes is 1 in 422 trillion, which is 1 in 10 to the 11th power. The odds of getting 3 royal flushes is 1 in 10 to the 16th power. The precision of gravity has the odds of getting 6 royal flushes in a row. That's the odds of gravity by chance happening to have the precise strength that it has, is getting 6 royal flushes in a row. The strong nuclear force. It's the primary force that holds protons and neutrons within an atomic nucleus together. Even a slight change in its strength could have dramatic consequences for the structure of matter and the universe. The Goldilocks zone means it's just perfect, and the strength of it is just perfect. The Goldilocks zone of the strong force strength is crucial for the existence of stable atoms and the formation of complex elements. It is fine-tuned in 1 in 10 to the 37th power. Here's an illustration. If it was to be stronger or weaker, but just by 1 in 10 part to the 37th power, a tiny, tiny fraction in either way, it would cause wouldn't be able to form. The universe wouldn't be able to exist. Here's an illustration of how precise this is. So just imagine North America. And imagine North America going up to the moon. And North America covered in dimes. The whole North America covered in dimes. Going all the way up to the moon. But 1 billion times. And you blindfold someone and get them to pick that you got 1 dime that's painted red, and they're blindfolded. And the whole North America is covered with dimes, going all the way to the moon 1 billion times, and you get somebody to blindfolded and get them to randomly pick 1 dime that's painted red, and then actually pick the correct dime. That's the odds of the strong nuclear force happening by chance. Critical density. If the critical density was off by just in 1 part in 10 to the 15th power, the universe would either collapse or expand too rapidly for stars to form. The cosmological constant, which controls the expansion speed of the universe. If it were off in 1 in 10 to the 120th, if it were slightly more positive, the universe would fly apart. If it were slightly negative, the universe would collapse. Alright, let's talk about protons. The ratio between the mass of an electron and the mass of a proton must be incredibly precise. Protons are 1,836 times bigger than electrons. If they were a little bigger or a little smaller, we wouldn't exist because atoms could not form molecules. Neutrons are a tad heavier than protons. If that were the other way around, atoms couldn't exist. Because all the protons in the universe would have decayed into neutrons shortly after the Big Bang. Dark energy. The amount of dark energy in the universe must also be carefully balanced, or else the universe would rapidly collapse or expand. It is fine-tuned in 1 in 10 to the 120th part. If dark energy were slightly increased, the universe's expansion would accelerate significantly, potentially causing a big rip scenario where the fabric of space-time tears apart, ripping galaxies and even atoms themselves apart. If dark energy was to slightly decrease, the expansion would slow down, potentially allowing the universe to eventually collapse back in on itself in a big crunch, depending on the amount of matter present. So, and it says on Google that, talking about this dark energy, that it says the significance of this is, the extreme precision of this number is considered a significant point in the fine-tuning argument by some physicists, where the seemingly improbable conditions of our universe could be seen as evidence for a design universe. You think so? I mean, look at the odds of all that happening. And it's not one thing. It's the 4 forces of nature. Gravity, the weak and strong nuclear force, electromagnetism. All 4 of those are forces of nature All those are essential. And look at the odds of each one of them being. Gravity has to be exactly precise. The weak nuclear force has to be exactly precise. The strong nuclear force has to be exactly precise. The electromagnetism has to be exactly precise. The cosmological constant has to be exactly precise. The dark energy has to be exactly precise. You got all these constants, and there's more of them. All these constants that has to be exactly precise, or else it would throw the whole universe out of in chaos, where the universe or life couldn't exist. And these scientific discoveries has caused former atheists to change their view and from atheism and to believe in intelligent design. Former atheist Sir Fred Hoyle, who is an astronomer, he says, quote, "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." He was a former atheist because of these scientific discoveries. He is no longer an atheist and now believes in a designer. Even agnostic Paul Davies, a physicist, says, quote, "There is, for me, powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as if though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe, the impression of design is overwhelming." Stephen Hawking says about the fine-tuning argument. He says, and he's an atheist, or he was an atheist, he says, quote, "The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life." So he admits that it looks like it was designed. And non-theist Mikio Kaku, a physicist, says, quote, "Scientists have in fact assembled long lists of scores of such happy cosmic accidents. When faced with this imposing list, it's shocking to find how many of the familiar constants of the universe lie within a very narrow band that makes life possible. If a single one of these accidents were altered, stars would never form, the universe would fly apart, DNA would not exist, life as we know it would be impossible, Earth would flip over or freeze, and so on." So these guys admit that the universe looks like it's designed, that the universe appears to be fine-tuned. So you got three possible causes of the fine-tuning. Either it's necessary, that it couldn't have been another way, that it had to be this way, or by chance, that it just happened accidentally, just a lucky chance, lucky draw, that we got all these constants of nature that just so happen to be the very precise measurement or strength that they needed to be, or else the universe would exist. And then the third option is design, chance. So Paul Davies, the agnostic physicist, says, quote, "There is not a shred of evidence," or this is talking about the universe being necessary, that these constants of nature had to be necessary, that they couldn't have been any other way. He says, quote, "There is not a shred of evidence that the universe is logically necessary. Indeed, as a theoretical physicist, I find it rather easy to imagine alternative universes that are logically consistent and therefore equal contenders of reality." So he's saying that there's not a shred of scientific evidence to say that gravity could not have been weaker or stronger. Or like Stephen Hawking that said that if the rate of expansion at the Big Bang would have been just a little bit weaker or a little bit stronger, the universe, we would have had problems with the universe forming. There's no evidence to say that it couldn't have been. Why could, if everything is random and the universe is completely unguided and there's no creator and then it's just random chance, why couldn't the universe have expanded just a little bit slower or a little bit faster? They act like everything in the universe is part of a plan or purpose. Why couldn't gravity have been just a little bit stronger or a little bit weaker? If there's no purpose or design in life, why couldn't all these constants just have randomly been a different number or different strength? If there's no purpose or plan or it's completely unguided. That makes absolutely no sense to say that it couldn't have been something different. And they'll say chance. So that's necessity. The next option is chance. Oh, that it could have been a different strengths and different possibilities, but it happened by chance. And so they'll use like the multiverse. They'll say that like, okay, there's this mechanism that produces universes, and it produces an infinite amount of universes. And so once you have we know it seems improbable to have all these constants just happen to be the precise amount. But if you have an infinite number of universes, then it becomes possible. That's what a lot of them believe in. That's what they hold to, the multiverse theory, and they think that is completely plausible. It's unobservable. It's unfalsifiable. There is not any evidence that it's even possible, and then it just adds even more problems. Well, how did the multiverse get here? How did it get fine-tuned to be able to produce an infinite number of universes? It makes absolutely no sense. Anybody that follows the evidence, and here is the criteria that you need to have. This is the crucial thing that you need to have. You need to have a philosophical view that says we can look for naturalistic causes for the universe, but we must also allow for supernatural causes, and let's observe the universe and study it, and let's use inference to the best explanation. Let's not rule out the supernatural. Let's look for both natural and intelligent design, and let's see which one best explains reality. That's what an honest scientist does. They allow for the possibility of God. The majority of the world believe in God. It's logical and intuitive to believe that all this was made by a brilliant mind. It's not a stretch to have God as a possibility for the cause of the universe. Why would you not allow for the possibility of God? Why would you rule out the possibility of God from the very beginning and then study the universe through a naturalistic view that says we must only accept natural causes and then come to the conclusion that God doesn't exist after you have already come to that conclusion before you ever studied the universe? If you are an honest person and you follow the evidence where it leads, you will conclude that the inference to the best explanation is God, an intelligent designer. We don't know what his name is. We don't know a whole lot about him. We just know that he's an entity, that he has an intelligent mind, and he's powerful. He transcends space and time, so therefore he's timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. He's very intelligent, and he's very powerful. That's all. Just by observing the universe, you can come to that conclusion without any kind of divine revelation. That's why atheists, former atheists like Antony Flew, a guy I'm reading a book on right now, he concluded that he for like 5 or 6 decades he debated. He was an atheist. He was a proponent of atheism and evolution. He finally reached the conclusion, after scientific discoveries, that there is in fact a God. Because, as he says in his book, he followed the evidence wherever it led. Sir Fred Hoyle, like I just mentioned, he followed the evidence where it led. There's many people that are former atheists that are now theists. They're not necessarily Christians. They're at least deists. or theists. But they realize that science supports intelligent design. So the next thing I want is DNA. You know, when they discovered DNA, they should have had a news, all over the news, scientific discovery. We found that all life has a genetic code, a computer-like code. It's the blueprints for life. It has the code for how to make each organism. It is a code, just like a computer code, with the recipe or the blueprint on how to build that particular organism. We have found overwhelming evidence for God's existence. We have found that all organisms have a computer-like code. That's what should have happened. DNA functions just like a computer program, software program. Bill Gates says, quote, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created, unquote. Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, says, quote, the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like, unquote. Francis Collins, the guy who was over the Human Genome Project, said, quote, DNA is something like the hard drive on your computer containing programming, unquote. Craig Venter said, quote, life is a DNA software system containing digital information, unquote. Bill Gates says DNA is like a computer program, but far more advanced than any software that has ever been created by man. You look at the intelligence of man and the software programs that people have developed, and then you take somebody like Bill Gates that says DNA is far, it's like computer program, but it's far more advanced than anything that has ever been designed. Why would you not conclude, why would you not see that and see that that takes intelligence to get DNA? Now let me explain two different processes that it blows my mind how people can see and understand these processes but not conclude that it was intelligently designed and that there's no way this can happen by chance. DNA replication. DNA is a double helix strand. And like I said, DNA, it has a code on it. You have four possible nucleotides. You have, and they're represented by four letters. A, C, G, and T. And you have machines in your cells that reads this code. 3 letters at a time. That's called a codon. So it reads 3 letters. So your DNA has to replicate itself. Cells die, new cells are formed. These new cells have to have the DNA code put into them, copied into them. You have, throughout the DNA replication process, you can look this up and see an animation on this. I encourage you to look this up. Your body your cells has to copy the code to put it in new cells. It's called DNA replication. It takes workers working together to make this process happen. You have enzymes and you have proteins, and they work, that functions just like workers. They have a certain job that they do, and they all work together. You have one enzyme that goes through the strand, and it breaks the bond of the 2 strands that are bound together. This enzyme goes through the middle of the strand, and it breaks the bond to where they can come apart from one another. Then you got proteins that holds the end of the strands down on both ends of both strands on the ends. These proteins holds the strand down where they can't move. Then you got another enzyme that stays right there where the strands come apart. It keeps the strands from getting tangled up. It's called supercoupling. So that worker does that job. The main worker, it starts at the beginning of the strand, and it starts going through the strand. Starts going down the strand. And as it's going down the strand, it's copying the code. And as it's copying the code, it's checking for any mistakes. And if it spots a mistake, it stops and it fixes the mistake. And then when it gets to the end of it, it goes through the whole strand one more time and proof checks for any mistakes, to try to spot any mistakes that it made when it copied. All these, and whenever it copies the code, it has certain workers that have to take out part of the code. It cuts out part of the code, and then it splices those pieces together, and it kind of like glues them together. It splices them together. You got workers that do that, that cut out the part that doesn't need to be there, and then you got a worker that kind of glues them together, that splices them together. All these workers, all these enzymes, have a certain job that they're doing. Like, how does these things know what to do? They don't have a brain. They don't have a mind. How do these things know what to do? It's amazing. And then you got protein synthesis. This is when it takes the copy and it sends it to the machine to actually read the code. It's a machine. It's machinery, basically. And it reads it 3 letters at a time, a codon. It reads the 3 letters. It's a code. There's a chart that you can actually look at, the code for this. It's got three different possibilities it can be, and you look at the chart and it can tell you what each one is a code for. There's 20 different amino acids, and so each code is one of possible 20 amino acids. There's also a code to tell it when it's done. So the machines start going through down the strand. It reads it three letters at a time, which is a codon, and then it'll bring in that appropriate amino acid, and then it'll look at the next codon. And then it'll bring in the next amino acid. And as it brings in amino acids, it starts forming them together in a chain. And the machinery keeps reading that code. That code is telling it how to form that protein, which amino acid to bring in. And so when it gets to the end, there's a code, like I said, that tells it that it's done. And so it knows not to bring in any more amino acids. These are all workers that are working together, doing a certain job, a certain function. Then when it's done, it folds into a certain shape, which is very crucial. And the way it folds into the certain shape is depending on the amino acids that are in the strand. Absolutely amazing. How could anybody believe that happened by chance? There's literally machines in your cells that are so tiny you can't see with your eyes. You have to have a microscope. It's machines in your cells that are workers. It's like a factory. It's like an assembly line. It's absolutely amazing. You know, every single day we get around 1 million lesions in our cells. But we have workers. DNA is very, very fragile. We get lesions, 1 million lesions a day in our cells. But we have workers that go out and repair the damage to those lesions. Absolutely astounding how anybody could believe that that's not intelligently designed. The next point is I want to talk about irreducible complexity. And it's the idea that when something is so complex that all these different parts work together, that if you were to remove one of those parts, that thing can no longer work anymore. And that it couldn't have evolved that way because you have to have them all there present at the same time for it to work. So therefore, natural selection could not slowly favor and slowly evolve into what it is now, because it would have never worked, and natural selection would have not have been able to select anything. A bacterioflagellum, I want you to look this up. This is an electric motor. These are within us. This is a bacterium. They have a tail that propels them through liquid. Their tail is connected to basically an electric motor. It has a rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, a universal joint, a propeller, rings, a clutch and braking system. It rotates at over 100,000 revolutions per minute. It has a forward and a reverse. It has a water-cooled motor. It runs at 100% efficiency. This is like the most efficient motor in the world that we know of. And it's inside of us that we can't see. And it is designed just like an electric motor and similar to an outboard boat motor. And it's irreducibly complex. If you were to take any of those parts away from this bacterioflagellum motor, it would not work. It could not have evolved piece by piece. It has around 40 different parts, I think, that it has to have all of them there at the same time in order for it to work. It's an electric motor with a rotor, stator, drive shaft, universal joint, propeller, rings, clutch and braking system, 100,000 revolutions per minute, a forward or reverse, a water-cooled motor. And you think that formed by chance? Oh my gosh. It's unbelievable. But they must reject it because of their methodological naturalism, or they rule out the possibility of God from the very beginning. Here's something else I want to talk about. Our reproductive systems. Now look at a human male. He has, this is parts of his reproductive system. He has testes, which produce sperm and testosterone. I'm not going to pronounce this right. Epididymis. It stores and matures sperm cells after they leave the testes. The vas deferens, a muscular tube that transports sperm from the epididymis toward the urethra. The next part is the seminal vesicles, glands that contribute a large portion of fluid in semen. Then the prostate gland is the next part. It produces a fluid that is part of the semen and surrounds the urethra. Then you scrotum, a sac that holds the testes and helps regulate their temperature. Then you got the bulbourethral glands. It produces a fluid that lubricates the urethra before ejaculation. So you would have to believe that all these parts of the male reproductive system happen by mutations, by a genetic code that got that got mistakes on the code, and it formed all these different parts. And then by chance, and you got like different ducts or vessels that go from one part that connects another part, and it transports that things back and forth. And then you got blood vessels that goes to all these parts. Then you got nerves that go to all these parts to the brain. And you think that all that happened by chance because of some errors in the genetic code. A woman, she has a uterus. This is her reproductive system. The uterus, the main organ where her fertilized egg implants and develops a fetus, also known as the womb. It has thick muscular walls that stretch as the baby grows. It has to have thick muscular walls for the baby to grow. But you would have to believe that evolved by chance, the thick muscular wall. I guess it was a thin muscular wall, or it didn't have muscles to start with, and babies kept dying. And then it evolved into thin muscular walls. That wasn't good enough. Babies kept dying. Then it slowly evolved into thick muscular walls of what we have nowadays. It's unreal how people can believe that this stuff happened by chance. A woman has ovaries. She has fallopian tubes. She has menstrual cycle, which is crucial to her for her to be able to stay fertile. So you expect me to believe that we all evolved from a common ancestor, a bacterial type thing, that reproduced asexually. And then somehow, by mistake, this thing started getting mutations, and it started developing reproductive systems to allow it to reproduce sexually, to where it would need a male and female. But until it evolved, it still reproduced sexually. And then it just so happened to reproduce, accidentally evolve into two different parts, a male and a female, that complement each other perfectly, that you have to have both of them. And that there's no evidence of a third type of reproductive system that just was a complete dud, that just never worked, that natural selection weeded out. So you expect me to believe that all organisms were asexual, and then they started getting mutations, and they slowly started evolving into a female, and slowly started getting all these different parts of this reproductive system, started getting a brain, started getting lungs, started getting kidneys, started getting a liver, started getting a heart, started getting blood and blood vessels, and all this started, and all the nerves connected these parts to the brain by chance, and then blood vessels connected all these things to the heart by chance, and the brain was able to control the heart and control the muscle and control all the different parts of our body. This computer that's in our head just randomly formed by chance, and has all these chemicals that just randomly form by chance, that has all these nerves going to our different parts of our body by chance, and that controls all this stuff like a computer. And then our heart, which is a muscle that pumps blood through our heart, that formed by chance. And the heart has one-way valves that it lets blood from one chamber to the next chamber, and it acts as a one-way valve. It lets blood in one way, but it does not let it back out the way it came. And that is essential for our heart to function properly. So our heart formed by chance, 4 chambers formed by chance, the blood vessels formed by chance, the one-way valves formed separating each chamber by chance, a one-way valve formed by chance that lets blood in but not let it out. And you'd have to think that everything of our bodies is an accident. It's a mutation. It formed by chance. Our mouth formed by chance. We used to didn't have a mouth, but it just accidentally, by chance, we formed a mouth. And then we formed these teeth that help chew up food. Our bodies need nutrients to survive. They just so happen to be nutrients in the world through plants and animals, vegetables, fruits, and nuts, and seeds, and all this. And they just so happen to be here, that our bodies just so happen to need. We just so happen to get this opening in our mouth, and these little things, just by chance, called teeth, just start growing in our mouth, and they don't grow in anywhere else on our body. You know, a mutation is by chance. There should be so many prototypes of design plans of organisms. Like the human body, it has 2 eyes. There's no evidence anywhere in the fossil record of creatures having just 1 eye. There's no evidence of eyes being just in a random part of the body. And eyes are always 2, and it's always in the most optimal part of the body, in the front of the face, in the head, front of the head. The way you're looking, the way the rest of your body is designed, facing, the way your joints bend. You would have to say that the entire human body, all the organs, all the tissues, all the muscles, all the tendons, all the ligaments, all the blood vessels, everything formed by mutations, accidents, random chance. What evolved first? The blood vessels, or the heart? It makes absolutely no sense. The human eye has 576 megapixels. Megapixels has to do with just more pixels. A megapixels, I think, 1 million pixels. The more megapixels, the better focus, the better clarity. The human eye has 576 megapixels. An iPhone, which was designed by intelligent people, has 12 megapixels. 12 megapixels. The human eye has 576 megapixels. The human eye lets light in. It has muscles that adjust to let in the right amount of light. It sends a signal to the back of the eye. Your brain, that signal is converted into an electric signal. And it sends that electric signal, that light is converted into an electric signal. And it goes through a nerve to your brain, and your brain produces an image based on that electric signal, based on light going through your eyes. That is absolutely amazing. How could anybody think that happened by chance or evolved? Your eyes, have you ever looked through binoculars and you look at things at different distances? You got a little focusing knob right there in the middle. You have to, depending on how far the thing is you're trying to look at, you have to adjust that knob to get in focus. Your eyes automatically focus depending on how close something is, the distance that you're looking at. You look at something close, you will see that it's in focus, and that things behind it are not, things that are a lot further away are out of focus. But all you have to do is move your eye and look at that thing that's further away. Your eye automatically focuses. Instead of having to have a knob like on binoculars to focus, your eyes automatically focus by your brain controlling the muscles in your eye. And your muscles move to allow different light in. It's unreal how people can see all this evidence for God and think that it happened by chance. I'm going to wrap it up. There's good scientific evidence, good logical evidence for the existence of God. And the reason that so many people say that there's no evidence for God is because they hold to the philosophical view that we must only allow for natural causes for the universe. That we must exclude and rule out the possibility of supernatural causes. That's the whole key right there. Once you understand that, and once you see how fallacious that reasoning is, and you allow for the possibility of God, and you follow the evidence where it leads, you will conclude that this world was created by an intelligent mind. Thanks for watching my video. I'm going to post some videos on evolution, but this is the key to evolution. Evolution is they have forced a naturalistic explanation for how all life got here. They rule out the possibility of God. Evolution is the only option you got once you rule out the possibility of God from the very beginning. And it's forced, even though the evidence does not support it. Thanks for watching. I'm going to stay tuned for videos on evolution. Thanks for watching.